Now, the one document that I often refer to when I'm talking about cancer is this document. It's called Food, Nutrition, Physical Activity, and the Prevention of Cancer. And this is the most substantial document ever written on the link between diet and cancer. In this particular report, over 100 countries were involved with many scientists from each country. There's also an independent group of scientists that continues to update the findings. So very, very important. It's called the Continuous Update Project, or CUP. I want to tell you what their recommendation was concerning plant foods and what their recommendation was consuming animal foods. Their recommendation concerning plant foods was eat mostly foods of plant origin. Eat at least 5 servings or 400 grams or 14 ounces of a variety of non-starchy vegetables and fruits every day. Eat relatively unprocessed cereals or grains and or pulses or legumes with every single meal. Limit refined starchy foods, and people who consume starchy foods like tubers and other as staples, also to ensure sufficient non-starchy vegetable intake as well. And their justification for this particular recommendation is that most diets that are protective against cancer are made up of foods of plant origin. And if you look inside the book, you'll see these kinds of tables. This basically shows what do we know about different factors in foods that actually reduce risk of various cancers, and what factors in foods increase risk. And this is looking at plant foods. And so what we know here is that plant foods consistently reduce risk of just about every type of cancer you can think of. There's absolutely nothing in the increases risk where convincing or probable evidence is concerned. Nothing, zero. And this actually was just added in 2011, the convincing evidence. There's very convincing evidence for foods containing fiber and reduced risk of colorectal cancer. Now, if you look at limited and suggestive evidence, again, we've got a ton of limited or suggestive evidence concerning plant foods and reduced cancer risk. There's only one that is possibly associated with increased risk, and that is diets that are very, very high in chili peppers, where you're eating them all day long so they irritate your intestinal lining and cause some inflammation. That's it. Everything else shows plant foods reduce risk of every cancer you can think of. So what is the recommendation concerning animal foods? Well, limit intake of red meat and completely avoid processed meat. People who eat red meat to consume less than 500 grams or 18 ounces a week, very little, if any, to be processed. The justification: red and processed meat are convincing or probable causes of some cancers. And if you look at the list here, what you see decreases risk, increases risk. Well, there's a whole lot on the increases risk column. So what we see here is convincing evidence for red and processed meat, increasing risk of colorectal cancer, and then all sorts of other cancers down here. The only possible protection from meat is fish may reduce, there's limited evidence that it may reduce colorectal cancer risk, and foods containing vitamin D may reduce risk of colorectal cancer. Limited or suggestive evidence for that as well. The CUP released another report in 2011, 10 new studies on red meat and colon cancer risk. Every one of them provided even more evidence that red meat is a very convincing cause of colorectal cancer. The panel strongly recommended that people, to reduce risk, meat intake be cut down. So the question of quantity arises. Have you ever heard of Walter Willet? He's the chair of the epidemiology department at Harvard University and considered one of the leading epidemiologists in the world. He was actually asked how much red meat is okay in terms of cancer risk. And this is what he said: like almost everything, it's frequency and amount that influences our risk. There's no sharp cutoff. It's like radiation. We can't say there's any safe amount.